Yes, so welcome. And so we'll be having a sort of brief conversation for the IoT World Solutions in Barcelona. And with me are three speakers, and a fourth will join later. So we have Rob, Tiffany. Rob, how would you describe yourself at the moment? Of course, it's early, so you will say, I've just woken up, 6 o'clock. But can you sort of introduce yourself briefly and tell them what your daily business is and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I'm just waking up and out on the West Coast, but it's good to see you all. So I work for Ericsson, and so I'm the head of IoT data strategy there at Ericsson. And yes, normally I'd be in Stockholm quite a bit, but I'm out in Seattle, separate, just like the rest of everybody else. So yeah, day to day working with our IoT team, working on our different strategies and go to market and things that we're doing, mostly around connection management and things like that. And then of course I also work with Rob here on something, different. I'm the executive director for something called the Moab Foundation, where we're using IoT to help society and the environment and things like that. So that's a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot, Rob. We also have Michele Nati. Michele, you're in London at the moment. Sort of self-isolate. You're at home like all of us, locked down.
Yeah, always in this bubble. Hi, my name is Michele. Long time knowing Rob, and pleasure to be here. I'm actually based in London, and I work for the IOTL Foundation. I'm head of their telco infrastructure development. As part of this, I develop and try to lead the strategy for using IOTA distributed ledger technology into the telco industry, whether it's to solve problem, optimize process that telco industry might have, as well as leveraging their technology, 5G technology, and IOTA technology in order to develop new solution, new vertical and horizontal use cases. I'm happy to be here and contribute with my experience on Internet of Things, personal data, and trust to the topic.
I see. So thanks, Michele. This is, of course, we'll be talking about this, also about, I would say, in a way, the massive sort of, presence and rise of IOTA in such a short amount of time, so this is exactly the kind of things that we'll be discussing, this kind of balance between centralization and decentralization that's happening, and how everybody is sort of positioning themselves. We also have Gaël Agar. I see she joined. She's a policy analyst in the European Commission, and she's working. We're working together on this next generation internet. All the projects that we're doing now around identity. So we also have Petros KAVASSALIS, with which we're working very closely. And Petros is a professor in Athens and very much involved in European projects and also in identity projects from the start, I would say. So Petros, maybe you want to introduce yourself?
Good evening. I'm happy to be here and contribute to this discussion. I am affiliated with the University of the Aegean. We are located in many islands in the Aegean archipelago, but also we have an antenna in Athens. So we move a lot, and we have a lot of video conference like this. Many years now, not only because of the COVID, because of the constitution of our university. I lead the information management lab, where we do a lot of identity management work. In the last years, we work a lot with verifiable credentials and self-sovereign identity technologies. Disposable identity is a concept coming from many of the participants in this meeting. And very recently, we do a lot of work with Ericsson and Hewlett-Packard to create an evacuation management system for the automated, for the ships, the cruise ships, the ROPAX, where we monitor the location of the passenger, the crew, and we can alert them, give them guidance in the case of an emergency, and of course, direct information through the IoT systems of the ship.
Yeah, thank you, Petros. I think what I will do is I will quickly try to sort of share my screen if that's possible, and let me sort of let me just quickly open something. Sorry. So yes. Got it. So are you seeing this screen?
Yes.
Great. I just want to, so this was a presentation, Gaël and me, we did this morning actually, in the context of a missing children symposium in Europe, Missing Children Europe, which was massively interesting if you just look at the facts. About 250,000 children go missing every year in the European Union, which of course is a kind of an insane number. And then there's lots of different topics and issues. But as we were doing research for this, we basically stumbled upon, let's say, the two trends that are happening now. So on the one hand, we have this, and it's kind of logical maybe, sort of as we are sort of ending the ends, we're nearing the ends of lots of paradigms. So we're in this Gramsci moment of monsters where the old is not yet dead and the new cannot yet be born. And we see all these aberrations sort of. And then, of course, we always have these two tensions. So there is this extreme centralization that people are advocating for when things get sort of out of hand and when new control gets needed. And then there's the extreme decentralization that sort of seems to want the same thing. So for the centralization, there are these ideas coming from Huawei and other partners about this new IP, which is like a more dynamic IP addressing system, where basically I think the identity layer will be inscribed in the sort of the protocol stack. So there's like things like shut up commands where network could be effectively cut off, things like that. And these are proposals that will be seriously sort of discussed. And then also, more in Europe, there was the DG Migration Home Affairs Commissioner on the subject that we talked about especially sexual abuse and lots of things, sort of that maybe encryption sort of could be broken or things. So there's these two tendencies. But then again, the other tendency that we see sort of is this self-sovereign identity kind of movement. And this is also growing, I would say. So in Europe, there's lots of work around it, but of course we know sovereign and there's lots of people that are involved. I think it has to do also with the growth of the crypto world and blockchain on the one hand and things like that. So these are basically the two sort of, I think, outer ends that I see that are basically happening now. And so it looks like we're in a kind of important moment where especially, I'd say, people in industry, people like Europe, who very sort of has this vast experience of being actually on the ground when the decisions are being made of where the investments are going to be for the next years. And also you, Michele, who basically see all of this also happening now with a lot of old actors with which you work, like the Industry 4.0 people like the Bosch and the Siemens and the Volkswagens, but also the fintech crowd and sort of all of this. And of course, Petros, you see this also from a research innovation perspective sort of happening and played out. So if I would ask the broad question of is this kind of very flimsy analysis idea of we see this extreme centralization and extreme decentralization happening. I mean, is that something that we see happening? Rob, would you, or do you think this is not the right way to look at it at the moment?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's right or wrong. I just know what's real or what's really happening. If I think about all the digital technologies and IoT and other things like that, you know, it's still, identities are still done the way they've been done for years and decades. I don't think anything's really changed. Obviously, there's people working on doing different things and decentralizing or centralizing. But the reality of what most companies and governments are using when they're participating is really still the domain of probably the big tech companies, actually. And so, you know, if you're working with Microsoft technology and Azure IoT or anything like that, you know, your identity is Active Directory, or Azure Active Directory. The same goes for AWS or lots of other technologies. And so when you see the most widely used digital technologies, the identity for how those things works for authentication is still primarily in the domain of that company that makes it. You know, it's interesting, and this is just kind of geeky stuff though. I certainly remember when we were building Azure IoT several years ago, there was the talk about using Active Directory for identities. But IoT data is moving so fast, so many messages per second, it couldn't authenticate fast enough. And so you saw the rise of different ways of authenticating and identifying things or whatever, oftentimes using some other kind of a token, you know, could be a GUID or a long integer or something like that, where you could authenticate things in memory at a high rate of speed. Because with IoT, you know, we're talking billions of things, tens of billions of things. And so it can overwhelm a normal identity and access management system. So in a big way, I haven't seen any real big changes. It's great to see this research being done. It's like lots of things in tech and society are pushing a boulder up a mountain. Yeah. But, you know, we'll see what happens. Trying to change the way the internet protocol works, you know, per the thing you just showed on the screen, you know, good luck.
No, yeah. Okay, yeah. No, I agree fully. And this is, of course, I mean, this also has to do with this crazy notion that Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn had in the 60s, 70s, actually to just conceive of a protocol like that just acts like let's say a postal service, and it's it ran counter to anything that was on the planet before. Sort of having a system ran without any gatekeepers or security, or just saying pass on the packet, and not having the infrastructure on the routers asking where you're coming from or where you're going to, and sort of course this was so counterintuitive to anything that we had in terms of data and information structures that that sort of, after 50 years, it's clear that it's really this very notion is really pressuring very hard against all the old gatekeepers who either want to now sort of put back something in it, which of course is going to be very difficult, but if you have like a strong push from China for this, for example, and then some backup of other sort of, these are all things that are still sort of discussed in national state type of situations,
yeah, of course you probably hear about the concepts. There may be good ideas being worked on, but the reality of how things will play off may be very different. We often hear there's scenarios of ending up with two different internets, one for China and one for the rest of the world. And I hear those discussions all the time. It's not like everybody's planning for that, but different parties have different interests, right? In what they're doing. And you may find yourself in a bifurcated world if someone goes off with different standards than everybody else. I even remember a while, gosh, this is just related to telecom. I remember, I forgot how many years ago, China wanted to use a different way of doing 4G for their handsets than the rest of the world was using. And I remember companies scrambling to see if their chipset could work with that, so you could still take a call there. But it'll definitely be interesting to watch how these different things played out with these different parties. And of course, as you said, the old monsters, the old guard, they don't want to give up being gatekeepers. I think they like being gatekeepers.
No,
and so we'll have to wrestle that away from them.
Yes, yes, I think that's yeah, but it's their job to be sort of, they're defined by the very function that they've awarded themselves. And I think, but here I think also IoT, of course, is so disruptive, because all of a sudden we're not talking about, let's say, a number of billion people, which of course is a lot, but we're talking about major amounts of billions of devices, where if your ecosystems are big enough to, you could actually then sort of do install certain new elements in protocols if you're because you're on device level, and that's yeah. Okay, so Michele, when you from your perspective of being in this very agile world, I would say now, of IOTA, sort of, maybe it's good to, if you want to briefly explain sort of IOTA to also the idea of the tangle and the notion of IOTA and in industrial internet, and of course then the telco angle that Rob brought up, because this is what you very much do, looking at this ecosystem of telcos for IOTA.
Yeah, no, thanks. I might say that I strongly agree that at the moment there are these two different worlds, the very centralized world that is trying to keep establishing its role, its predominance in the infrastructure and also internet world. At the same time, the decentralized world that is actually now still thinking the centralized way, everything has to be decentralized. And the reason is because this new technology, new emerging technology like blockchain and distributed ledger, they still have to prove their value. And they are doing this by showing that decentralization is a good thing. But I believe that at some point there will be need for the two trends to converge and complement each other. I don't see a world that is fully decentralized. I don't see either a world that is fully centralized. So IOTA is hopefully there to play this role. We are a distributed ledger technology and called IOTA. The foundation and work is actually a not-for-profit organization that aim to promote adoption of the distributed ledger that we develop. We are somehow different from the blockchain in a sense that we still have the same properties of security, decentralized consensus, but we don't have all the fee structure that is required in order to use technology like blockchain or Ethereum. So IOTA technology is actually a feeless technology that can be used, and that's very suitable for this Internet of Things. The volume of data, the volume of transactions, the Internet of Things should support. That's where the Tangle can actually help and complement the existing centralized infrastructure. If you think, for instance, to the identity side of this, we still probably will need central authority that issue credentials that are verifiable and actually states who actually an individual is, but the control can actually be now, thanks to this technology, to the centralization, and distributed ledger can be managed and handled by an individual. An individual can decide on how this verifiable credential that stays who is who are to be accessed by third parties. So to remove that full centralization, it also introduce a single point of failure. If you think about small businesses, I'm working in project from European Commission that want to empower small business in playing the digital single market in an infrastructure for e-commerce is actually more safe and secure. So I don't see in the future all data from an individual being replicated in every single small e-commerce website with a liability for all the different small and medium enterprises that have to deal with this data. But in that case, decentralization can help to decentralize this control of data, having this data stored somewhere else, and decide that actual user to share this data when it's the right time. So I think we are now working in separate compartments, but I believe that in future there will be high convergence of these two technology for a better infrastructure, in the information and technology service.
Thank you, Michele. And sort of if you are talking now, sort of in the ecosystem, you are talking with let's say like if you talk in the commission with like research innovation sort of actions, and in terms of industrial internet, in terms of these numbers and these volumes, have you been sort of working with these numbers and with this kind of scale with IOTA?
Yeah, we have different projects where actually the amount of scale it's important, and the support of this technology, this new emerging technology like distributed ledger have to scale, and sometimes the cloud scale more faster than the distributed ledger. So IOTA actually is currently around 1,000 transactions per second that can be confirmed in the network. There are different ways to do this. We are very far from the 7 transaction or whatever we have in blockchain, and by next year they will have even more. We are aiming for 10,000 transactions per second with a new version of the protocol. But nevertheless, scenario like decentralized energy trading, so where you see different buildings now becoming source of energy, being able to produce more energy they consume thanks to renewable energy, and want to trade this energy at local level, local scale. So an infrastructure that should be decentralized and be able to everybody to join this open marketplace in a way that is open for competition, price competition, and this sort of things. That's where the right amount of scalability of the distributed ledger has to support is required. And there are technology like IOTA and other distributed ledgers that are now actually focusing on this scenario and can work on this scale. So yeah, I think technology is maturing, and new opportunity for new business, new way of designing solution, and this even new marketplace that are more decentralized will start to emerge, and we start to assess their value.
Thanks, thank you, Michele. So, so Petros, so for you, basically the same question a little bit. Sort of, are you feeling that this that we are in this moment where we see this centralization movement on the one hand and decentralization on the other hand, and like Michele, I think, do you also think that we can come up with sort of more like bottom-up solutions, more solutions coming from the practitioners, from the experts? I would say that's also how things like IOTA started in the network, coming from, not from, of course, from like theoretical concepts, but basically from doing things and from also bottom-up community type of situations. Do you think that also, I mean, the way that you have sketched and are building this disposable identity idea, for example, and the notion of the credentials, and do you see this credential as kind of this work on credentials as kind of a bridge between this centralized and this decentralized?
Oh yes, I think there is obviously there is a bridge. Of course, there is a constant trend towards decentralization. We can understand it. We can see how many things we can now do from our computer. Several years ago, this was impossible. We would need to use a client in order to access a system. So there is decentralization. But sometimes we cannot really perceive the value or the presence of this decentralization because you have this kind of mixed systems. The decentralization requires the support of some central entities to work effectively. This is the internet. The IP is a wonderful protocol, but in order to have the internet, you need to have the centralized ISPs, which provides the functionality of the internet. This interplay between centralization and decentralization is constant. We have clouds, and we promise to have decentralized clouds and cloudlets and edge clouds. We had a monolithic mobile network. Now we have a network with a slicing possibility. So the decentralization becomes a basic element of the mobile network infrastructure. I think in the history of the technologies, we have this continuous competition between fragmentation and consolidation. The decentralization creates always the possibility for fragmentation, and then some consolidation gives to the system a more dominant design. This is what we know from the history of the technology, and especially from the history of IT technology. In any case, yes, we observe these trends everywhere, and of course in the domain of the identity. Sometimes, some years ago, we had a centralized identity doing everything. For example, a bank used centralized picture of ourselves stored in the possibility of the federated systems. The federated systems are already a form of decentralization. We have service provider using the information provided by IDPs, identity providers, but we are still in the centralized paradigm with the self-sovereign identities. We move a step forward to reach eventually a more decentralized model where where self-sovereign identities can be sent to the hands of the users, of the identity owners, and this is very important. But at the same time, we need to have governance, the organization of the space. So again, the negotiation between the decentralization and the mechanism requires some central management or efficient management. Again, concerning a trade-off between decentralization and centralization happen in this story too.
Thanks, thank you, Petros. And just quickly, just one little thing, sort of. So you talk about disposable yet official identities, and I think that's exactly the kind of bridge that's also there between, let's say, the centralization and decentralization, where you keep this official aspect of the issuers and the decentralizing aspect of the disposable sort of together.
There are several lines of separation. There is the separation between a centralized identity and a decentralized identity. And of course, there is the line of separation between permanent identities we need to have, because we need to prove that we are ourselves in a government agency. But also, we need to have identities that are trusted, not really permanent. So I cannot do the correlation between a permanent identity and a disposable identity that's context-based. When I'm going to take a flight, I have to prove my identity by showing a very official EID card with a lot of personal information on it. Why should I do that? There is no reason to do that, to provide all my identity paper-based or electronic identity in order to prove that I'm Petros KAVASSALIS and I can take this flight. I can have only a subset of this, which is minimal, which is context specific, everything that I need in order to access the airport, go through the check-in, access the gate, and enter my flight. Everything useful that is here, but there is no other information. And most important, when I finish my travel, nobody has traces of this identity. This is an identity that served a specific objective, a specific need. There is no way to, if we have this concept of disposable identities, there is no way to link a travel with an next travel or with my identity. So to create this trace and in that way create issues for the privacy and make people worry about how we use their personal identity information.
Thank you, Petros. So, Rob, from your perspective, sort of what would this sort of conceptually mean if we would take this notion of identity down to this layer of attributes and sort of credentials? Does this is that a major kind? Is that an incremental step in how you see things, or is that like something that would really need a new conceptual model of
Yeah, you know, anything's possible. And, you know, just to stir the pot here, because we need lots of controversy to make this more interesting.
Yeah.
You know, I can imagine other people looking at the idea of disposable identities in the same way that some people look at something they call a burner phone. If you, when you think about the bad guys in certain movies and stuff like that, and they have the old flip phone, burner phones, and they throw them away when they finish using them because they don't want to be traced.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine that side of things with disposable identities. There might be a bunch of people who are like, oh, this is perfect. This is just what I've been looking for, is because I need to throw away my identity as soon as I get off this plane, because I don't want people to know where I am.
Yeah.
I think, you know what, it's the technology, we can figure it out, but there will always be this tug of war between governments, between technology gatekeepers, and then between people who are trying to break free of that, maybe, or at least reduce, because I know a lot of people feel like they're probably being tracked everywhere, and they probably are via identities. You know, I think, gosh, disposable identities, you know, the way people are, you know, there's government identity, there's tech identity, there's people who are authenticating based on Facebook and Google as opposed to corporate identity or things like that. And then when you introduce this idea of a disposable identity with some subset of credentials, just enough to get me on this flight, who is going to be in charge of distributing those disposable identities? You know, maybe governments. I don't know. It'll be interesting. That's a tough problem to solve, I think.
No, it is exactly, and I think you're hitting on the nail on the head. It's a governance issue, and that's, I think, how we also sort of seem to want to address it, which is if we look at the net itself, at the internet, we can say that sort of ICANN sort of grew alongside it. Like, it wasn't there from the beginning. There was no governance sort of there. It was
right.
It grew alongside. And I think what we are seeing, especially with digital identity management at the moment, is that it's being outsourced to corporations, basically. So national states are outsourcing it to corporations. And sort of we're looking at a world in which our digital identity management, which will also become our hybrid real management, because the passport will become a credential in that wallet that you're sort of. And then I think the argument is, then I'd rather go into a world in which we are educating people into handling their own wallets instead of being handed a wallet from Google or Facebook that will then basically proactively decide, because identity at that moment is only part what I produce, but the other part is what my objects tell about me. And that's where you come in. That's where IoT comes in. Sort of, I say, it will be more what my objects are telling about me, and what machine learning and AI is telling me in my behavior. Sort of, so that is actually becoming more important than me providing some credential. And so identity itself becomes very dynamic, and how IoT is looking at identity and at these issues, I think is. It could be really important to sort of to at least I mean, I fully agree with you. We sort of, we don't want to facilitate all kinds of behavior, but we also don't want to at this moment sort of immediately hand over identity to commercial players who have no stake in how society is actually sort of run. But
yeah, maybe the United Nations should be doing this. I don't know.
Well, the United Nations are doing that, but basically there's corporations doing that for the United Nations.
Yeah, exactly. So, they need their own IOTA distributed ledger for the planet.
Yes, as well. So sort of before we go to Michele, so we just have Gaël Blondelle joining, and after Michele, I would like to ask Gaël to quickly introduce himself and talk a little bit about Eclipse and how they are moving to Europe. But first,
Okay.
Michele, so when you hear Petros and when you hear Rob, how are you? How important is it? Do you think that IOTA comes with this, with a vision, or with, like Rob says, like stir the pot, come with some strong notion of vision, or not, sort of, or building incrementally on use cases? Maybe sort of, is it a good moment to come with a vision and to port that and say, this is how we see things, or how are you seeing this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I might say that I agree with Rob in the sense that definitely having disposable identity shouldn't be a way to justify behaviors or any sort of behavior. I still believe that the element of tracing and leaving a breadcrumb, it might still exist on what individuals do, because individuals should be empowered to make their choice, to control their identity, but should be also responsible on the way they behave. So I'm saying that probably this trail of what we do should still exist, but should be, again, that one in control of individual and not large corporate that can use this to track behavior and to predict behavior, and at the end of the day to just try to sell something. So I think, but again, on top of that, there is a need for a well-established governance that decide when there is something to be fixed, when there is a risk management to put in place, then we need to get access to that information. And then that person should be responsible also to provide trace of what was his behavior, what was the use of disposable identity, and so on and so forth. So I believe that, yeah, it's the right time to steer for a vision. The only way to do that is that really we have to work with who actually are the end user of this new technology, because I believe that so far what won was actually convenience over privacy and control. So distributed ledger can provide a new way to solve the problem and to put all these pieces together, disposable identity, as well as with a private audit trail of what I'm done. If I'm requested, I can provide this full control in my hands. But the other problem is that are people really ready for this responsibility and be able to manage and even understand the tools? So there is a lot of work that is not only technology side, and IOTA can play a role, but we have to work more in a multidisciplinary environment where we learn also from user experience experts, sociologists, whoever can help us to understand and to be in the mind of individual that now suddenly there to make their choice and to be also responsible of their choice. So there is no more somebody else to blame or something like this. So I think, yeah, it's time to share a vision that unfortunately cannot be only from a technological point of view, but yeah, we need a driver, and yeah, we hope we can inspire some way of working in a more collaborative, community-driven environment than other players in the field.
Thank you, Michele. And yes, indeed, sort of this is exactly so. I see this as the start of a conversation, so this is already fantastic, and that's what we're also working on this notion of custodians. So indeed, people are not educated in handling private keys, so we will see custodians. And for example, like a telco or an ISP or something, they can be part of this custodian system. So custodians will be crypto to a certain extent. It can be a friend, it can be your neighbor, it can be an uncle, it can be a neighborhood store. It can widen a circle of trust of people. And so yes, I think but if we look at what's happened sort of recently, and if you would have said 10 years ago that your data belongs to you, blah blah, sort of that the notion of what is happening to data. I think we think that this will happen with identity in the coming years. So it's kind of a logical step in the emancipation of, let's say, citizens or people, that if GDPR and all these things are sort of, and people are beginning to understand that data is something that somehow is valuable for them, the next logical thing will be sort of where you anchor that, which is somewhere, which will be more like, can be this identity as a dynamic process. And so now I would like to, so Gaël Blondelle, are you here?
Yes.
Okay, Gaël.
Good afternoon. Thanks.
So I'm sorry, you were another seminar, so you couldn't really follow what we've been talking about, but I would like to ask you to sort of to explain a little bit about Eclipse and about the move to Europe, if you want.
Okay.
And about the ecosystem, and then sort of we'll sort of ask people to respond on that. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Thanks for the invitation. And yes, I have been connected for the last 15 minutes, so I heard a bit of your conversation, and that's lots of very interesting questions and topics. So about the Eclipse Foundation, so well, we have been one of the important umbrella open source foundation since 2004. So at the beginning, it was only the development tools, but since 2010, any kind of open source projects can be part of the Eclipse Foundation, can be hosted by the Eclipse Foundation, as long as the project team agrees to comply with our development process, our style of managing intellectual property, and this kind of stuff. But I come back to that. And so, yeah, in 2004, that started with the IDE. Since 2010, that's open to any technologies and any language and any kind of project. And since 2013, we created a subsidiary in Europe, a GmbH in Germany, and we have been participating in several European funded projects, especially in the domain of IoT and edge computing since then. And last May, just after the end of the lockdown in France and Belgium, we thought that it was certainly a good moment for nice news. We announced that we are moving legally from being a US organization to becoming a European-based organization. So we are still in the process, because with COVID everything takes a bit more time. But anytime soon, we will have this Eclipse Foundation AISBL, so established in Brussels, and we are already, for example, using euro as a currency for everything. We are adapting all of our policies to be based on EU regulations. And we also started to host code in Europe. And the goal from our point of view is really that in the last 10 years, we have largely developed our membership and activities in Europe, to the extent that we have 2/3 of our members and 2/3 of Eclipse committers, so developers that really write the code, are European, are based in Europe, and that's we think that with all the political statements from the European Commission about open source, with projects like GaiaX and all the stuff around AI, there is really this mindset to set up Europe as the center of gravity for open source, and that certainly requires an open source foundation based in Europe, but with international reach and reputation. And that's the role we want to play. And that's something that has been supported by all our strategic members when we decided to move. So that includes the American companies like IBM, Red Hat, Oracle, but also our European members like the IOTL Foundation, for example, or Bosch or Daimler. Daimler, for example, is joining us as a strategic member in the context of this move. And so you were talking about governance at some point, and I think that's what I would like to explain is that, in my opinion, we all agree that open source hates the world. So what Marc Andreessen predicted 9 years ago has happened, but that after that, open source is eating the world, and there is a specific role for open source foundations in providing good and supporting good open source governance, because I see so many companies or researchers that think that they can push their code on GitHub or another place like GitHub and pick a license, and that it's okay, they are open source. What we provide is a predictable development process, rigorous intellectual property management that includes making sure that not only all the intellectual property of a given project is good and clean, but also all the dependencies of the project are available under a compatible open source license. And basically, that's for us. We are all software people to some extent around the table, so that's easy. But I think that for the users, for the people who download those open source technologies and want to create product or solutions on top of it, that's really the promise that they don't take legal risks and that they can safely download the software and build on top of it. And in addition to that, I think that one or two very important aspects related to open source, I would say, that's interoperability. And for example, we started 2 years ago to adapt our open source development process to enable the creation of open specifications. And those open specifications have several nice characteristics, like in order for an Eclipse specification to become final, there is a strong requirement to have at least one compatible open source implementation under what I would call a business-friendly open source license. So that's a strong requirement, and also, yeah, that's more obvious, but with the characteristic of transparency and openness that comes with open source, then there's no magic, but you can implement processes to ensure privacy and security of the solutions that you build with. And I think that will be one of the evolutions of an open source foundation like us to start develop new services to specifically target privacy and security aspects in addition to intellectual property or community development aspects.
Thanks, Gaël. I think, I think what's extremely interesting in the context that we're discussing is that that this notion of governance, then we talk about sort of things that are coming, let's say the 5G, this SSI, this new notion of identity, is that this notion of governance, it can actually start on a technical, on a software, in the frameworks where actual things are being done, but we can actually maybe think about political aspects, business model aspects to run consecutive with that notion of governance. So to immediately take into account what's happening. And for example, what's happening, of course, in Europe at the moment is the discussion on the EU ID, the discussions on Gaia and so the idea is actually that we would like to be, we'd like to see a kind of situation in which the technical building really runs very, very, very parallel to what is happening on the ground, also politically and economically. So maybe Rob, I was just thinking, sort of, of course you know the Eclipse Foundation, but after hearing Gaël, what are your first ideas or response?
Well, I am a fan of the Eclipse Foundation. I was actually just talking to Mike Milinkovic the other day, actually. I guess he's up in Canada. And so I guess congratulations on your big move to Europe. That's great. That's exciting. You know, I think open source and open identities and a lot of these things all go hand in hand for sure. And it goes back to transparency, you know, in a big way. And, you know, I think, gosh, at Ericsson, we definitely participate with Eclipse, and I've got lots of colleagues, and obviously, you know, even thinking about it, you know, like the foundation that you and I are working with, Rob, you know, about open sourcing a lot of this technology, having some of those principles and the way, you know, you follow things and getting out there, it makes a lot of sense. You know, I like the way he laid out all the governance that Eclipse follows to do that. It's such a messy world out there, you know, with so many governments and competing interests and companies and everybody, you know, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants their thing to be the thing that takes over the world. And so, gosh, it's so hard to find cooperation sometimes, you know, amongst all these competing parties. But I think about things like IOTA, things like foundations like Eclipse is certainly a step in the right direction. And then being able to work with organizations like the European Commission. I'm just rambling here. I'm not even sure if I answered your question.
You're making a lot of sense. You're making a lot of sense. No, it really no, like you always do, but it really is about this co-opetition, what I call it, like co-competition, co-opetition, co-option, all these things. And that's what, but that's what's happening. But I also think that a lot of good things are happening in this respect. And if we look back in earlier centuries, we come from such a strange and bad there's a lot of good things happening, but indeed they need some kind of coordination and governance at the moment. So that's also, I think, how I see these talks as maybe a way to start things. But that's so maybe Michele, just quickly, because we just have a few minutes left, so I would like to give Michele sort of a chance to reply to Gaël and then Petros, and then we call it a day. And I thank you a lot for this. So Michele.
Yeah, don't know what was the answer, but sorry, the question, but I will definitely agree with Gaël and Rob as well about few principles that, yeah, we didn't stress enough before about interoperability, and as well as some best practices and some good practice in software development, especially open source software development. So that is also why we are part of the Eclipse Foundation, and we, together with the Eclipse Foundation, we are running what is called the Tangle E. And our ambition is actually to develop a technology that becomes much more open to interoperability with other technology. Again, there is no one distributed ledger technology that will rule all them all. I think we talk about collaboration and integration between centralization and central elements, and decentralization and the central distributed ledger technology. I think also distributed ledger technology, they should work together. And again, the principle of developing open source, all these solutions should at least be recognized in a way that we don't just make possible to develop everything or any way that then we lose control and we make all this governance effort even more difficult to be achieved. So we are not really looking for a system that can self-regulate each other. We are not ready for that. So definitely having a system that follow best practice and make possible to have a transparent governance in place as well. That's the key for the future development and success of this technology.
Thank you, Michele. Then to you, Petros, for a few closing words.
Actually, we all welcome the Eclipse Foundation in Europe. This is a very important event, especially the collaboration with IOTA in the context of a specific identity management group. I think we need this openness. That means we need the concept of open standards. We need to give to this identity management, which used to be a very closed story, a very proprietary story, to give the possibility to adopt more open standards. And I think this is important because identity is not anymore only our civil identity. We have now linked identities, and we have behavioral attributes within identities. Ericsson did a very nice work to promote the 5G network to the position to understand the location of the user and produce data for use from reuse from the network of the location of the user. We need to find a way to protect now the privacy of the user. Tracing is a bad thing. It's a very bad thing, as much bad as it is the poverty or the pollution. And we need to fight the poverty and the pollution. And now we did that, and sometimes successfully. We invented in Europe the institution of a minimal wage to give to all citizens in order to fight the poverty. In many places of the world, we developed a culture of protection against the pollution and environmental sensitivity. We need to develop this privacy sensitivity and to convince the citizen that we can do. I think in this fight, governments are not necessarily the bad guy, perhaps a good ally. And I mean, I trust more the French government or the US Congress, at least more than Facebook. I believe we can create interesting alliance and interesting ecosystems and find the right way between the technical self-regulation and the regulation in order to have more efficiency. In Europe, we proved that with the electronic signature. We developed a nice system of electronic signature that is completely trusted based on technical standards and on the EIDAS regulation. It is an example of how we can create these new forms of identity, a new generation of identity, that it is regulated, but not at the point to be controlled, and technically entrusted from a technical point of view, and self-governed in a way. Perhaps I'm too much optimistic, but we need a little of optimism right now as we live in the confinement of the COVID-19. So let's be optimistic for the day.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. So with this, I wanna thank you all for joining and doing this, and I hope we can meet again soon in London or Stockholm somewhere and have a coffee and a good sandwich and chat. But thank you very much, and well, I wish you a good evening or a good day, and we'll be back discussing this. So once again, thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to you. Bye. Thank you. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Stuff.
Thanks.